Section 232 steel import tariffs, Section 301 tariffs, IEEPA's facilitation of President Trump's reciprocal tariffs, and one decisive Supreme Court ruling. Are we on the verge of a shake-up of US tariffs? That's what we're about to discuss in this episode of Speaking of Steel. I'm Tom.
I'm Laura.
I'm John.
Great stuff. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you.
And Laura. It's great to have you in the
it's
studio.
in person.
Yeah, all the way to Sheffield from Washington, D.C. to
Very
join
exciting.
this one. Great stuff.
And a little early, but yes.
Yeah, yes, of course. You're still trying to adjust to the time.
Exactly.
You'll be back before you've had a chance to do it, I guarantee it.
Yeah.
Okay, but really interesting discussion and timely discussion this time around, because we've recently seen the outcome of that Supreme Court ruling on the IEEPA tariffs that led to the result of Trump's so-called reciprocal tariffs on many products entering the US. Can you, Laura, first of all, just share a little bit about that process and perhaps some of the repercussions to kick off?
Yeah, great. Thank you. It's hard to believe it was just less than 2 weeks ago that the Supreme Court struck down the IEEPA tariffs, or the International Emergency Economic Powers Act tariffs.
You remembered that.
Exactly. I actually had to look it up. But we also known as the reciprocal tariffs that ranged from 10% to 50% on imports coming into the United States. And so those were struck down, effective on Tuesday, February 24th. On that same day, though, the U.S. administration enacted Section 122 tariffs of 10%. There is some misconception going on this one. Trump announced the 10% and then upped it to 15%. But as of today, we are still importing most products from countries around the world at a 10% tariff. So, needless to say, that is a lower tariff than where we were for many countries. I mean, a majority of at least major trading partners for the United States is now lower. The punchline is that for folks probably watching today, steel itself is covered under a completely separate program called Section 232, and those tariffs remain in place. This did not affect 232. There's other Section 301 against China. Those were not impacted. There's anti-dumping and countervailing duties. Those were not affected. It is only those what we called reciprocal tariffs, ranging from 10% to 50% on many products coming into the United States that were revised. So don't turn away yet, because we're going to talk about some of the indirect effects of what could happen to the steel market itself. And really what we're considering, of course, is that, yes, it doesn't impact steel buyers directly that are importing, but there's this uncertainty of what comes next. These Section 122 tariffs are can only stay in effect for 150 days. So that's through July 24th, for those that are doing a little math. Without congressional approval, they have to end. And the Trump administration has vowed to get the revenue back to where it was pre-Supreme Court ruling. So there needs to be other tariff programs put in place. And it is that uncertainty that we were facing just almost a year ago at this same time that really has impacted steel, and it could return coming into over the next few months for steel markets in the United States.
And I guess that's why we're here, why we're on the podcast. It feels like quite a dynamic, fluid situation now, despite the fact that Section 232 is currently appears to be set in stone. And I know all our assumptions at MEPS are based on that, all the forecasts that we produce at the moment. But obviously we're 12 months on now from President Trump's sort of blanket reapplication of Section 232 tariffs that removed quotas and sort of leveled the playing field for a lot of exporters around the world. How have MEPS research partners responded to the changes that's brought into play over the last 12 months, just focusing on Section 232?
I think that, at this point, most people assume that it's going to stay in place, and this is business as usual. In terms of, yes, I think that that's really the main, obviously we had to adjust supply chains. Many people were importing steel products. But for the most part, we've adjusted. We're now 50% tariffs, which sound unbelievably high, are the new normal at this point.
And we'll go on to talk a little bit more about price and things, but do you think many people in the sector are fully aware of the repercussions that we're going to talk about today, those reciprocal tariff changes?
I don't think so, not yet. It's still so new, and I think there's still so many, given everything that's happening in the world right now, and this is just one of the things that have happened over the last couple of weeks, it's really been hard to keep track. Not only, just speaking specifically about tariffs, over the last year, as you've noted, there's been, framework agreements of tariffs, and are they finalized, are they not? We're gonna get into a little bit of that. But there's just been so many announcements that may not happen, and then there are things that did happen. It's very hard to keep track, and I do think that, the one constant, of course, has been this 232 tariff on steel and aluminum, but it's extremely hard for most people to keep track of it.
Yeah, just to add to that, so we've got research partners in the US, we've got them in Europe, and the 232 tariffs, of course, those in the US were sort of cheering it on. It made their lives just a little bit easier. Conversely, in Europe, our partners have been telling us that this added tariff just makes things that much more difficult in a time when sort of the economy's not doing particularly well, when sales are sort of generally down, when there's all of that competition from Asia. All of these just sort of combine. So having that little bit of certainty around the 232 tariffs is a good thing, but that's just about the only certainty I think that there is at the moment.
Yeah.
There's like you say, there's the new tariffs that replace the reciprocal tariffs that essentially flatten this to this 10%. And some people, if you remember the big board that Donald Trump had,
yep,
some of these tariffs were 50, 60, 70%, and some of them much lower. So kind of what we're sort of expecting at the moment is that it's going to take a little bit of time to adjust to things. We've got people in Europe who are telling us that yes, it's that much more difficult to sell into America, but we've got contracts, we've got deals, we've got agreements. We are going to continue selling those. Obviously, exports from Europe, from Asia have all gone down. We've seen, tariffs have worked. The 232 tariffs have worked in the US. That whole aim of bringing back production into the US, that's happened. If we look at, say, last year's sort of total crude steel output, USA went from sort of the world's fourth largest to the world's third largest, going from 2024 to 2025, overtaking Japan. And we've seen sort of a corresponding reduction in imports as well. And that's been pretty much across the board, I think. We've seen sort of, Canada, Mexico, they were sort of very close trading partners, so they were sort of hit immediately. And we've kind of gone from this situation where I think it's around about 26 million tons of imports into the US in 24. There's been about 3 or 4 million tons sort of lost off that over the when you look at sort of 25 as a total. And the vast majority of that is sort of concentrated in the second half of the year. So, long story short, that bit's staying. That's not going to change. It's all the downstream effects that we're going to see with these changes to the sort of the IEEPA and whatever replaces it.
Yeah, and I guess an interesting dynamic in all this is the trade agreements that Donald Trump and his team have been striking at quite a rapid rate in recent months. In the International Steel Review, which covers all these areas, US, Europe and Asia, we've obviously noted the fact that Taiwan in particular had recently struck a deal, and they were sort of celebrating a lower reciprocal tariff, which might boost their export opportunity into the US. I guess, John, all those trade deals now with that Supreme Court ruling are sort of null and void. It's all done and dusted.
So we've seen a lot of announcements about a lot of deals since this sort of threat first came along. What we've got to sort of like tease out is that some of these deals are frameworks and some of these are sort of complete sort of agreements. Framework, essentially, what that does is it's an agreement to continue with sort of a semi-negotiated middle ground. The agreement isn't complete; it's not finalised. But until that is finalised, both parties have agreed to sort of slightly lower those reciprocal tariffs. The vast majority of the announcements we've seen about these frameworks, there are fewer, like say Taiwan's one of them, where we've actually gone to sort of full agreement. Don't get me wrong, framework still means that the exporting country is going to be picking up lower tariffs in the meantime. But like I say, there's only a few of these sort of fully agreed deals. And we're seeing sort of major trading partners, so like the EU. Okay, so Donald Trump wants this all to happen very quickly. We've got to hit sort of the latest news cycle, but that's not really sort of how things happen in the European Union. There are 27 countries there, 27 governments, all contributing their thoughts and opinions. Okay, so it's still led by the European Commission, but it's been very easy for them to sort of take the sort of the natural advantages of the bureaucracy inbuilt into the European Union, just to sort of take things very, very slowly. And essentially what they're sort of doing now is continuing in that wait and see kind of mode. And we've seen other countries sort of take slightly different approaches. We've seen countries that are much more keen to make an agreement, much more upfront, concerned that if they don't, then these higher tariffs are there to stay. But really what's the same challenge the US government has now is the one they had, say, 12 months ago. They want to make deals and they want to negotiate with basically the rest of the world. And they've only got that one team, that one department there that's doing that. So this is going to take a long, long time. One last thing I just want to say about that is we've just recently seen sort of a few developments around Iran. And
Putting it mildly, John. Yes.
Yeah, a few developments.
Very diplomatic.
Yeah. My thoughts on this, it really is that we could see tariffs or the threats of tariffs to maybe sort of strong arm a little bit of sort of compliance and cooperation with for other countries to sort of support the US in their actions over there. I think that's something that we're likely to see. Interesting.
Laura,
Yes.
while we're talking about Taiwan and those negotiated agreements, it's worth pointing out, I think still, isn't it, that while that lower 10% tariff that's now in place on a lot of products other than steel
Right.
will encourage people to perhaps export to the US, the steel element of any product is still covered by Section 232. That's right, isn't it?
Correct. So you're talking about derivative
Yes,
products or
absolutely.
derived or fabricated, anything that has steel in it.
Yeah.
Yes, so that was something that was put in place last year. That not only this is very different from the 2018 tariff, is that derived steel products or fabrications, anything with steel in it, were covered under 232. And so the interesting thing is, and most products are majority steel, but just to note the difference is that the steel portion, as described or conveyed when they're entering the country, that steel portion is the only portion that's covered at 50%. Now the non-steel portion would be covered at 10 under the Section 122 tariff. So that has been slightly lowered, but again, I think this part for most of them is pretty small. It's mostly steel. The interesting thing is that there's really been with the introduction of these derived steel products, there was an inclusion process set up. And I will tell you, this has been maybe a pet project of mine, I will say. It's something I don't think is being talked enough about, but this inclusion process, set 3 windows throughout in any given year that companies related to the manufacturing of these products could submit their product to be included in the 232 tariff of 50%. Well, there's been 3 windows now open, May, September, and now January 2026. And only one of those has been announced in terms of their the results. I've emailed I've called them, I've emailed them. I'm like, when are the results from the September window and the January window coming out? There's been no answer on that. It is interesting because I think that was part of the rumors about maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, are 232 tariffs going to be coming down for steel. And I think it didn't necessarily have to do with the rebar and sheet and coil products, but it had to do with these derivative products, because those products are more likely to be purchased by us, like the consumer. And there is really an affordability issue in the United States with the midterm election coming up. So I think that's where it really surrounded this rumor of 232 tariffs kind of pulling back. But this derived steel aspect is something that could increase. There's over 500 products now included. That's another way to get revenue in. This is about, a lot of this is about revenue. They were getting about, $30 billion in revenue every month prior to the Supreme Court ruling going down, striking down those IEEPA tariffs. And they have vowed to regain that money to come in. This is one way with which they could do it, is start implementing. But there is a question of how do you balance who pays for that, the affordability issue, and so forth.
Can I just get this straight? So if we're going to be including more products within Section 232, a higher percentage of those products could be tariffed at this 50% rather than, say, the 10%?
Yes.
Okay. Right.
And
If they have steel.
Yeah.
Presumably they have to.
Steel or copper or aluminium or all the other.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is not an inclusion process for copper.
Okay.
Right? There's not an inclusion process for that yet. There's an inclusion process for steel and aluminum, and there's an inclusion process for auto parts at this point that was introduced also last year. So these products, should they be submitted, and I will say after that first round of steel and aluminum ones, everything was included that was submitted. Everything was included.
I was about to
everything
say,
was included.
it's the steel makers, the steel producers that are making these requests for things to be included in Section 232.
And the association. So it's the associations can submit. It's the steel makers. Nucor in the first round submitted, I think, over 200 different codes to be included in that process.
It was pretty decisive, wasn't it, that first round? And a vast proportion, if not all, were agreed on. Am I right?
The only ones that weren't agreed, that said we're not going to approve these, are the ones, the HS codes. Again, it goes back to the complexity of our system at this point, is that some people submitted codes that were actually already included under either the auto tariffs or maybe some other 232 programs, or just another tariff program. So they didn't include those, but that was a small percentage. Almost, really, unless it was already covered, it was approved.
So I would guess, in light of the Supreme Court ruling, you would have expected that this derivatives inclusion process would have accelerated, or would accelerate in response, because people would want to retain more tariff.
Well, it was a big issue during the first Trump term, is that they did not cover fabrications. And so instead of buying the steel and making the fabrications domestically, you just imported. So this was a big issue that a lot of manufacturers, or really the steel producers, discussed, is that we didn't necessarily see the full benefit of the tariffs because they were just importing fabricated products, right, instead, and bypassing the whole production process. And so they really tried to address this issue explicitly. So yes, I did think that would be something that was, continuing to be, expanded.
Because it's on fairly safe legal ground, isn't it? There's lots of precedent for 232. It's happened several times before, not just for steel, but for other products. Whereas the IEEPA tariffs and the broad national emergency that had to be declared in order for those to be applied, that was
without
really,
the act of Congress, right?
Yeah,
yes.
That's really what sort of the Supreme Court ruled on. And we were talking about this before. I didn't realise just how many different sort of tariff mechanisms you guys have in the US, and they've all got these catchy names as well, which is really good for us. So there was the 232, and 122, those, so the 232 survives. The 122 is the new replacement.
And that's
And-
untested.
and
And
that's-
that's a new use of 122. So at least in the States, there is a certain amount of rumors going around.
Yeah, so I think it makes sense that you try and drag more product into Section 232. That's something that's
Or
working.
301. 301's the
Yeah.
other one that the administration really spoke about when they announced the 10% Section 122 is that, but be prepared for 301, which is unfair. I mean, the biggest one that we went through in 2018 was the Chinese. I think they covered a whole slew of products ranging from 7.5% tariff to 25. And those are still in place to this day. And that was under the, property, infringement, intellectual property
Yeah.
infringement. That's one that they could, but that involves a very lengthy kind of investigation. The one I'm kind of looking at, I will say, is a Section 338.
That's the first time I've heard of it today when you come in, yeah.
Well, it's another one that's been floated around, not mentioned by the administration, though, but it is something that you can enact a tariff by country. So 232, remember, is by product, so fairly narrow. We got, this, derived steel, aluminum, we got derived copper products. There's so many that are just by product in the 232. But then this 338, it can be enacted by country. So under the unfair trading practices or the deficit, trade balance deficit, is really the reason for it. So, and it can be up to 50%, and it won't go away, and you just need a 30-day window to enact it, is my understanding. This is all my understanding. I am not a trade lawyer by any stretch of the imagination, but it's pretty easy to get through relative to some of the other options they have. But the issue is really it's untested as well, similar to this one, the one that's currently in place right now. So it's a little untested, a little nervous, and I don't think they certainly want to go down the road of a Supreme Court ruling again.
Okay, Laura, I think it'd be good now just to reflect on that last 12 months of Section 232 implementation in the US and just how that's affected the price trends that MEPS monitors. Because there have been some interesting developments over the last 12 months. Can you explain, perhaps summarise how the market's been affected?
I think that's probably the easiest question you've asked all day, to be honest with you, because the answer is that prices have risen. They have moved higher, with hot rolled coil approaching 1,000 short ton at this point. Up from, I think, just as recently as 2024, it was at 650, I think. I mean, that's a sizable increase. And this time, I think, really what we're seeing is it's been because of the threat of tariffs and because of the supply chains needing to adjust and, imports not coming, slowly declining, it's been more of like an incremental, like it hasn't been a huge jump like sometimes we've seen, particularly on the flat side, but it's been an incremental increase. So they're higher. And I mean, for instance, and on the long side, last year we didn't see, there was one monthly decline in rebar. Everything else either flat or stayed unchanged for the month or just it's just been creeping up. It's creeping up.
And is that a lack of domestic production and that deficit in imports that's prompted that?
We do have there's been a fair amount of new production. I mean, I hate to say this statement, but the tariffs do come at a good time for domestic producers because they were increasing capacity quite a bit. There's a lot of new facilities coming online, as you heard us talk about before, both on coil, even on the rebar side right now. It's coming at a good time, but if you've been working with a supplier over the border in Mexico or Canada for a decade, it takes time to readjust those your supply chains.
John, have you got a trend on those price trends in the US as well?
Yeah, so I just want to step back a little bit and just sort of look at it more sort of globally. So we've seen the US prices sort of increase throughout 2025. And the differential between say, the US and Europe has widened. The US and Asia has sort of naturally widened. I mean, just sort of looking at, say, the US and Europe, we've only in the past month or two seen any sort of narrowing really of that gap, and that's only because Europe are starting to put their own tariffs on. So we've got CBAM that's come in. We've got tightening of safeguards, which is going to increase tariffs there for up to 50% as well, just like in the US. And it's only really because of these tariffs that we've sort of seen that sort of narrow a little bit. And I mean, I've made this point before. I think this 50% tariff is probably where we're going to sort of end up globally for this club of sort of Western producers.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's sort of why we're sort of naturally falling there. We've got the UK, we've got Canada as well, also got 50% tariffs. I think this is sort of the rough outlines of a framework of a club for these Western steel producers. And in Asia, the prices are so low. What were you telling us the other day about the China prices?
China's like, what, $450? I mean, it's equivalent to what we pay in scrap in the United States. I mean, it's just so low.
So those tariffs can be absorbed after a point as well.
Right.
I think, Laura, it's probably time in the podcast that we can sort of wrap up a little bit by looking forward. And, you know, we've considered lots of tariffs in this tariff-themed podcast. But how do we anticipate that all these things combined are going to affect US steel prices going forward? I mean, is there a risk that even the 10% tariff, which may become 15%, will affect demand, for example?
I think, I mean, first of all, let me back up a little bit and discuss what all these things, I mean, there are a lot of unknowns happening, and then I would say through the summer. One is what we've been talking about today. Where will, the average tariff sort of settle into in the near term? There's also tension in the Middle East, driving up production cost potentially for manufacturers, everyone around the world. Oil, gas feeds into everything. You also have in the United States the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement up for review in July. I mean, all of these, and all of these are creating a certain amount of, I wouldn't say anxiety, I think that's probably a strong word, but certainly makes people think about investment. Think about where does steel go into? It goes into investment items. I'm investing in a new car. I'm investing in a new home. I'm investing in a construction project. All of these take forethought, and this can weigh heavily on that. That said, prior to all of this, we were expecting I'm going to classify it as a soft decline in steel prices, a pullback. And I'm going to say a slight pullback in steel prices in the second quarter. We're going to be, we've come off this restocking cycle that we've had in the United States in January. Demand is improving in the United States. We had an extraordinary PMIs come out, the purchasing manager indices come out, both the ISM and S&P, extraordinary, like very strong. For February this last week. But if you really look at the hardcore numbers, the latest production figures on auto sales, under 10 million annualized. Construction spending overall, there are pockets of growth that we've talked about in the past. It's on the slight decline. We're really not in a strong return to a strong demand environment. You got more supply coming online. You do have a pullback in imports, but the soft decline, and I say soft decline for a couple of reasons, is one, you do have a maintenance season outages coming up in the spring. That's going to keep prices somewhat elevated. And also because of these tariffs, you do really have, like what we've talked about in the past, Tom, a floor and a ceiling on some of these prices. How high can they go? Well, if they go too high, sort of like what you were just alluding to, you get imports coming in. Beams is one product that is, it's over $1,500 per short ton right now. And you are starting to see imports come in, at least increasing. So that's on the scene. And then, of course, tariffs raise the overall floor cost first. So you have this narrow range, say soft decline for those reasons. You know, we haven't done our forecast this month yet. We have a lot of discussions to do.
They're going to have fun doing those.
Yes, we have
Why
a
they're
lot
not
of
doing
discussions to do, but I do think that overall the risk will be somewhat on the downside in the near term. But again, there are upward pressures. There is an upside risk, especially if these lower tariffs compared to where we were just 2 weeks ago come down. That could, kind of be helpful to the U.S. economy as well. So maybe we can join you again in another month's time.
Oh, well, I think we've got something planned for next month already,
That's
Laura.
right.
So we will
That's
be
right.
back in the studio,
Yeah.
or at least we'll be back delivering another
Right.
episode of Speaking of Steel. Interesting. Anything else to say, John, on this episode? It's been an interesting chat, hasn't it?
Well, I suppose the only final thing to say about this one is if we're not going to be talking about it next month, we're going to be talking about it in 5 months' time. What was it, 150 days?
150 days.
That's
July.
how long these this new version of the 10% tariffs can remain in place for until they need congressional approval. So yeah, let's book the podcast studio and we'll come back and talk about it then.
Great stuff. In between now and then, of course, we'll carry on covering all the steel market news from Europe, Asia, and North America in the International Steel Review. So I guess people need to subscribe to that and keep an eye on our commentaries, don't they?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll leave it for there, guys. Thanks ever so much for joining me in another great episode of Speaking of Steel. I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.